Hello, Miss Denise-Marie. How are you?
Good. How are you, Kimberly?
I'm great, thank you. It's such a treat to have you on the show to chat our so exciting hip replacements.
It was funny when you asked me to do this or when we had chatted about like what can we bring out to the world with our experiences. Ever since I've known you, I can't remember how many years it's been now, but we have just so much in common. And when I saw your post about the hip replacement, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. We can't make this up. We even have that in common too. Same hip, same procedure. Crazy.
It is crazy. It is. And, I get so many questions about mine, and I'm sure you do too. And so that's why I thought, well, let's have a conversation and let's share like what the experience has been. And just in case this would be helpful for people who have had them, may have them, or just curious about them, because I think a lot of people are curious. So thanks for being here. Let's
No,
dive in. I mean, I think the thing I want to start with, and I've got my notes over to my right, but what were the signs that you felt like you needed, that something was going on in there?
well, this is something you could relate to, and a lot of your audience, your fans. I was doing a frog post like 5 years ago that I really had no business doing because it's been a long time since I was at that level, but I was doing a 7-day challenge and it was a challenge. So I was really proud of myself, but I couldn't get up. And I said, what is that? Something popped and I just was like, okay, well, that's not good for me. And from that point on, I noticed, moving into the can't sleep, hard to walk, hard to stand. And it wasn't the cause of it, but it was the time that I started to notice things. It might have just accelerated it with the pop. But sitting for a while, like more than 15 minutes. So you can imagine flying like we like to do long haul flights. It's like you're shifting in your seat. And I really didn't know what was wrong. So talked to my primary about it. And they suggested I get an x-ray. And they came back and said, you have minor arthritis. So that was the start of it. And I don't know, I made the appointment with some doctors. I mean, should I continue with what I'm, with my signs? Because I just want to see if we're on the same page too.
Sure. Well, what's interesting for me, I've always had a little bit of I shouldn't say always, but in the past maybe 5 to 8 years, discomfort in my left hip flexor, right? So it was like um dragon pose for anyone who's listening and knows yin pose, right? So it's or yin yoga. It's basically like a deep lunge with the back knee dropped and you hang out there for a while. So things like that I loved, and I loved pigeon pose. I was always a hip opener girl, right? Always loved those. And it just got to the point where that area was just like kind of tender, like really tender. And I saw my ortho who did my shoulder surgery, and, he encouraged PT. I was put on anti-inflammatories, and the PT, it wasn't getting better. And then I was in a ballet class doing bar, nothing out of the ordinary. And I felt this, like, I don't know if I heard, but I felt like a pop down there in my left hip flexor. And then the rest of the trip I was away, it was like hobbling, right? So I go back to the ortho and I like pushed to get because, he'd done an x-ray too and hadn't noticed anything too askew. So then they do the injection, like a needle this long with dye to see like I don't know what it's called, some MRI, right? Where it's like they inject dye and then put it up on the screen, like whatever, I didn't know. But whenever I met with him, he was like, so your hip flexor is shredded. He used the word shredded. And he's like, you need to see a hip doctor. Right. So then I go and I see a hip doctor, and the whole time I keep doing my ballet and just popping anti-inflammatories, getting some cortisone shots on the side. And the hip doctor's like, you need a replacement. Right. So he does an x-ray and then he's like, yeah, it's bone on bone. You need a replacement. And that was end of 2020. Right. And so I was like, okay, but I just kept doing what I was doing, which was a lot of ballet. And then I had scheduled a surgery for May of 2021, Memorial Day weekend. Woo! But then Tim and I were like, we're getting vaccinated. the world's opening up a little bit. Let's do a long road trip. So I was like, yes. So I canceled the surgery and we did a road trip instead. And I just managed it, honestly, with anti inflammatories and cortisone shots. But the last cortisone shot I got, because you cannot have one more than or closer, 3 months in to the surgery, right? So the last one I got was in April, because at that point I scheduled my surgery for July. And I got it and I felt nothing. And it's a really long needle. Denise-Marie, I
Right.
don't know if you ever got one, but they
No,
are
I never went that
long.
road. No.
Oh my gosh. And when it went in and I felt nothing except for the pain, but it was no help. I was like, okay, yeah, I'm so glad that the surgery is in 3 months because it was definitely needed. But what's crazy is like I did that ballet performance, I did all the prep for the ballet and everything. And it was just like, it was livable, but it was really uncomfortable. So, yeah, that was my experience. Like, how did I know I needed it? I mean, finally, the doctor told me, but I pushed for it, right? Because if you're doing PT and taking anti-inflammatories, that's all great, but like nothing was improving. But once they did whatever it's called, like an MRI with the injection of dye, and they can see everything internally, it was like, oh, okay. So I knew I needed one for what is that like? Is it like 2.5 years or a year and a half? I can't do the math. December 20. Yeah, like a year and a half. So I knew I needed one, but I just like, you know, put it off and kind of just kept going.
It's very similar because thinking that was just arthritis and I could see it in my fingers. My fingers are starting to bend and I like to longhand write a lot. And I know you can relate to that. And so it's a little pain and it was, aesthetically, it was like, I want to go get that fixed. So, but I did go to an arthritis doctor and he basically told me, you're not young anymore. Your body is like a mess. You need a hip replacement. You shouldn't even, you know, the only good thing on you are basically your knees. And I'm looking over at this guy and he's a dumpy guy who probably, does nothing in the area of wellness, taking care of himself, but he's telling me it's over. So I dismissed everything he said. And I told him I'd be walking the Camino de Santiago right before I retired. And he said, you shouldn't even be walking your dog. What are you talking about walking the Camino? And I was just going to do the last 100. And he was just really, really just negative. So that was the end of that. And I said, okay, I'm going to learn to live with it too. So I went to an orthopedic doctor that I knew from a board I was on to straighten my fingers. And he's like, what about that limp I just saw you walking into the x-ray room? What about that? And I said, well, I'll get another referral. You can look at that next time. He said, no, I'm going to send you back in there, get an x-ray. And he confirmed, like he's the one that told me, you're bone on bone. I want you to see my colleague who does hips. I don't know how you've been walking around with that, but like you just deal. And I wasn't, I just stopped doing things that were painful. And during COVID, it was easier because we're, in quarantine or we're, you're not as active. But then I went, trying to think of the sequence. Then I went to the hip doctor. He confirmed clearly, yeah, you need a replacement, but you don't have to do it now. Same kind of thing. You can manage your pain. He wasn't pushing for surgery, which I really loved about him. And, he said, you can still do the Camino. It's, just make sure you have trekking poles. We'll give you some anti-inflammatories. If you need them, just take them. And I was really happy. Then I did the Camino and it was really hard with that hip. So I said to myself, I retire in 1 month. This is not what my retirement at 61 is supposed to look like. I don't want to have this. I want to be active. Going on those cobblestone streets right up the hills, forget it. I'm not going to be a cripple in my retirement. So I booked the surgery just like you did, out some months. And, that was that. So my surgery day would be 1 year ago next Friday. So I'm a little bit ahead of you in that recovery period, which I know we've been supporting each other throughout because we're very similar. Like, let's get this done. Don't let anyone take care of me. I'm not a helpless person. I can do it. And I really learned a lot about patience and allowing other people to help me. So back to you with the with the procedure itself.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's like I thought if I didn't have Tim, if Tim had not been around to help, I mean, I would have had to go into an assisted living sort of
Absolutely.
experience
Absolutely.
because there's just no way to manage. I mean, you're pushing your little walker to the bathroom and you can barely move. I mean, it was just like I was dropping everything and then I had that little, oh, what are they called?
The reacher,
Reacher. Yeah.
ever a reacher, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like it was pretty intense. But the one question that I get all the time, and I'm assuming you probably do too, is like, what caused it? And what I find so interesting to me is I do not know, right? No idea. My grandmother had 3 hip replacements. Is it genetic in some capacity? My mother has had no hip replacements. Um, but even the doctors, like if I ask them, like, oh, what do you think caused it? Or what should I have done differently? Or what should I do differently? It's like they don't even they poo-poo the question. It's kind of like, oh, we don't know. We don't know. We just let's just move forward, right? But I'm curious. It's like, because okay, if it's overuse, right? Oh, I did one too many pigeons. Well, why one side versus the other? Because I always balanced it out. So yeah, it's a very curious thing. Like what causes this? And especially, pretty young, right? Late 40s, you were early 60s, and started dealing with it late 50s. So it's like, what in the world causes this? But I mean, like, do we have answers to what causes arthritis or the removal of cartilage? you know?
No, no, I had the same thing. They don't know because I said, "What can I do to prevent it from happening to my right hip?" I mean, and it's like you just have this propensity, and there's really nothing. Maybe I can't imagine that there's not somewhere in the world an injection that helps you build cartilage or just inject, but there isn't anything like that according to all my research and all the doctors I've talked to. Stem cells, they talk about that. But as far as what caused it to offset it for anyone that's listening, it's like, hey, I don't want to go down this path these two went through. Um, it doesn't seem like there's any answers for that. You just have to listen to your body. And when things start to go, or feel pain, I don't even know at what point when you're being told and we're asked, you're getting injections. I'm told hey, it's nothing. It's just some arthritis. Well, in fact, I was actually told it was piriformis syndrome initially. We'll work on your IT band. I only had one session with the physical therapist, and then everything got shut down with COVID. So I don't know if that would have been something that, that would have helped release something that would have made me. But when you're on bone, there's no choice. And it happens to athletes. Look at athletes get hip replacements really early now. And if you start looking, they're putting kids that are in college football programs getting hip replacements. So, whether that's right or wrong, it just seems to be, it's not age related anymore.
Mhm.
It's just activity related, what you're doing, how you're sitting. I was told another thing too, Kimberly. Well, you people that like to sit with your legs crossed, one leg over the other, it's just more of a, which I sat like that for years. I don't
I
know.
I still do. And one of
I
the
do too. I'm more comfortable doing that, and we're not supposed to, I don't think, but
we're
it's just,
not. But I didn't realize that. Like I had the posterior approach and I had a lot of things that I couldn't do for, I don't know, 6, 8 weeks. But then they were removed, the restrictions like forward folding, things along those lines. And uh when they were removed, I thought, oh, I'm okay. But I always sit cross-legged. And one of my PTs like hit my knee and she's like, you don't do that. And so I think of her every time I cross my legs, but I
I
still cross
know.
my legs.
I did too, but now I crossed instead of my left over my right like I normally favor. I cross the right over the left. I alternate. I'm thinking, okay, I'm living in balance somehow, but still not breaking
Totally.
that habit. I know
Totally.
it's something. When I was in the hospital, and I think we outpatient. So did you spend one night in the hospital?
I did, yeah, because I had a lot of reactions to the anesthesia. So I couldn't even sit up, much less do the steps. that you're supposed to do the PT before you can go home. I couldn't even sit up. So yeah, they
The
admitted me.
same. Yeah, I did the same, except I was 4 nights in that, 3 or 4 nights because I have low blood pressure. So I couldn't, you know, stay standing up for a while because the anesthesia was also affecting me still. And I couldn't stand up long enough without getting really dizzy and having to sit down right away to learn how to use the walker and go to the bathroom and all the basics that we take for granted. That was another great lesson. Like, how much do you take for granted of what your body does that you are helpless doing the
Oh
basics?
my gosh, right. Totally helpless with the basics. And you know what was interesting? That anesthesia, like it's always, hard on me, but was so bad. And what was crazy is that next day they kept trying to get me to sit upright to like do the stairs and, practice the walker. Oh my gosh, putting on pants with a reacher. I was like, are
Oh
you kidding
no,
me?
brave
Hard,
girl.
so hard. But and then, the second day, the surgeon wanted to release me. And I was like, can I please stay another night? Like I'm so sick. And he's like, no, he wouldn't approve it. And so we drive home and I'm throwing up the whole time because I'm still so messed up from the anesthesia. And I'm like, what was the issue with me staying another night in the hospital? Oh, he said I could stay if I paid for it. So he wouldn't approve
Here's
it
the
for
issue, your
insurance.
insurance wasn't gonna cover it. Yeah.
Well, was the insurance not, or
I
was
don't
it a
know because
ding
for
on the
me, I was
surgeon?
shocked, that I was covered. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it would have
Basic
been covered.
policy.
I mean, it's like, you really don't want your recently operated on person going home vomiting in a bag. It's just not a good
Yeah,
look.
it's not good.
So no, so that was a little disappointing, but the whole experience itself, like, how was it for you? I mean, of course, we arrive early in the morning. We get oh my gosh, they gave me a cocktail of so many drugs, like pills, like from Oxy, Xanax, all like, I don't know, 5 or 6. And she was like, take these. And that was before I saw the anesthesiologist who gave me, what's the one they do in the back, an epidural?
Epidural?
Did you have an epidural?
No, I had just, the full general anesthesia, like, right through they couldn't find my veins. It's always a problem, so I had more trouble with that, but
Yeah,
I got that in there. But yeah, I didn't have so you were
epidural.
awake during the time?
Oh, no, 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 no. Epidural, you're out.
Oh, I
Completely
didn't know.
out.
I
Yeah.
didn't know because they told me. I asked them about the epidural. It was an option, and I said, "What's that?" And she goes, "No, we want you completely out."
Yeah,
So what?
totally. You want
Right?
out.
It said,
Yeah, you do not want to be awake for this.
"No."
But, yeah, no, it was, like, weird. So I get all these, like, pills, and then, like, the anesthesiologist, they just have you, like, sit in the bed and lean over, and then they put the epidural in, and then I'm out. But I asked the guy, I'm like, "Do I have to have an epidural?" And he said, "If not, I'd have to have a breathing tube," and I didn't
Yeah,
want that.
no, that I had that,
Oh, you
and
did? Okay.
yeah, I didn't know that was part of my protocol until I couldn't believe how dry and my
Ugh.
face and was raspy and just irritated. I'm like, "What in the world happened?" Well, that's the tube. So, okay. So one of the things that recommendation, ask every question, make notes.
Get the epidural. Like, I didn't want it. I was like, "Who wants a needle in their back?" But when he said, "Well, the option is a breathing tube," I was like, "Well, I don't want that either." So
Yeah.
like, I don't want any of the above. I mean, I don't know if you knew what a hip replacement was. I mean, I've always thought the hip bone, the pelvis, like, was replaced. And they're like, that's not the hip, but it seems like the hip. So did you know?
No, I see. Oh, you know what? And I don't want you to, like, oh God, just another thing she's saying. We haven't comment. I really went. In fact, that was my reaction to that jerky doctor hip replacement. I'm like, that's a big piece to go with there. They should say hip joint. Maybe they do, and I missed it, but they just do. It's a hip replacement. So, yeah, I had the same feeling about it. I asked the PA since I was in the hospital for so long. I was like talking to everybody. They just come in and chat with me. I said, "What does it look like? I want to visualize what it looks like. It isn't like this white porcelain ball with bright light. I'm trying to make anything I can out of this to like, what is going on in there?" He said, "No, it's hot pink." And from that point on, I thought, that's really cool. So I Googled it, an image, and I said, "Is this it?" He goes, "Yeah." And I go, "All right, that's pretty cool." So Kimberly, when I think we're iconic and bionic. So they've got these hot pink things in here. And um, I, I don't know, but I really didn't have an idea. I did try to get as much information as I could. My surgeon was awesome. He had a nice package to bring, for me to review when I signed up for it and booked it. But I wanted to actually see what they were doing. And I Googled like YouTube, I want to see a procedure, but it just I wasn't able to find one. I don't know. I wanted to see, and I didn't fully appreciate what major surgery it was, because through the recovery process, they would remind me when I was pushing myself and then having setbacks. They're like, you have got to get it through your head. This is major surgery. We cut your bone, we cut your muscles, we cut your tendons, we sewed them all back together again. And you need to be patient with this recovery because it is major surgery. So when they say outpatient surgery, to me, I think you're just going in or out, like going for a colonoscopy, you come back home. It's major surgery. And I don't think, I think we need to emphasize that it is a big surgery that I would still do all over again. Going on my 1 year mark, it's been a great thing for my life. But you probably couldn't have convinced me of that until maybe a couple of months ago or 3 months ago.
It's
But it's
funny.
worth it. I don't want anyone to be afraid to do it.
Totally. So a friend of
Walk
mine
the
who
walk.
had one also, she was like, do not Google it. Do not look at what they do because I think it's pretty intense. I know, and I still haven't, but yeah, I think it's pretty crazy. And the one thing that happened to me, which was my femur broke. So, the doctor explained they're jamming that implant into the femur, right? And that is what goes into the little ball that goes into your ball and socket. So I think we got all of that new. I think you got that too, total
Yeah.
hip replacement. And I don't know, I guess I didn't realize. I mean, yeah, I just didn't know like what went into all this. But then, the femur cracked, which, I guess happens apparently in 5% of patients. Unfortunately, it happened to me. And, so I've got this metal band around my femur and I'm having issues still. And so I don't know if it's that. Now I saw a third surgeon for a third opinion and was told it's bursitis. So I got a cortisone injection in the hip, right around my scar area. So it's so interesting how all the different surgeons that are top surgeons in the DC area have different opinions as to what's going on. And I know you had complications too. So share that because I had posterior and you had more a side approach, right?
It's called posterior too, but it is on the side, and it's a long scar as opposed to that anterior that was like this little. I talked to my doctor about that. Whether or not that was an option for me, he said, yeah, it's an option for you. I just don't do it. So I can refer you to someone who does, but I have a better experience, I think, with this, that the joint will stay in and not dislocate. And sadly, my friend who had the anterior just recently, I found out yesterday she fell. And it's not a good thing. And so I think, we, at the end of the day, even though our recovery time is so much greater and we have this scar, I don't know if you've had this, but I have like no embarrassment or shame to lift up my dress or pull my pants to show people my scar. Everyone's like, what is it? Oh, here. And I forget, like I'm in the middle of a street. It's just something, but it's real. But yeah, I had some problems with it. When I went in for a follow-up, I told them when I was doing physical therapy and did the step up on the box, it was really hard to get the leg up to the box and it wasn't that high. And I heard you could visibly see my joint moving. So they called me back in and they said, it's your IT band that didn't connect. We just need to go back in, easy surgery, restitch it. For some reason, first time ever it happened to my doctor who did, for 25 years has been doing these. First time it happened to him. So it's like your 5% story. It's like, of course it's us. And well, when he got in there for this quick surgery, it was 2 hours later because he discovered that wasn't it. So see, no one knows a lot of this stuff. Everyone's so different when they show up. And it turned out to be pretty significant scar tissue, bursitis, and adhesions that he spent scraping away, scraping. He came out of surgery, told my husband, she's going to probably get 85% back use of her leg. Where, but when I did a follow up, he said I could get 100% back. And I can actually, I'm so happy to say that I can lift to do it like a 90-degree angle, but there's still a little shifting involved on my part, where I have to, if I want to do this, I have to, okay, just adjust it a little bit to the left and it'll work. But yeah, so I had that too. It's not unusual. I understand from Googling. And yeah, I think you're right. Wise to stay off the Google. Um, it just, that's where I got a lot of my questions from, to go further, but there's too much information out there and too much conflicting info. It's not really a great service to yourself. But it seems like a lot of people have to go in for a tweak of some sort.
Yeah, and let me just clarify, I
Yeah.
definitely Googled the hell out of all of this, just
Oh,
not
I was going to say, I'm
yeah,
super
no,
impressed.
just not what happens in surgery. That's what was someone said, "Do not look for that until after the surgery," because like you said, I mean, it's pretty intense, and I think it's pretty aggressive, like
Yeah. I mean,
and, it's interesting that what you say about the anterior approach, because that is what the doctor who I did choose, the posterior approach, he said exactly kind of what you were told, is that they can see the joint a little bit better than with the anterior, but the anterior is a very specialized, right? And not, I think it's becoming more common, but not as many surgeons know it yet. And so it's somewhat specialized. I'm sure it's still, like, super good for most people, but and yeah, I mean, he even said, like, yeah, it'll go kind of in your bikini line, so it's like,
yeah.
it won't show, and meanwhile, I don't know about you, but I think my scar is, like, this big.
Well, I'm tempted to jump right up and show it to you. It's about, I'm going to guess, mine could be like 10 inches long.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And it's some days it's a bright purple, some days it's like you can hardly see it, but with the scar tissue, it's a little bit of an indenture, I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
The cupping, have you tried the cupping that my PT told me? And it really seems to make a difference pulling that up. But
Yeah, I want to try that, and I was thinking I should get to an acupuncturist, to do a little work on it, and, I mean, I don't mind kind of what it looks like, kind of like you, I think
well,
it's,
I
like,
don't
kind of
care
a
at all.
cool battle wound, but if, the scar is just still so sensitive, 7, 8 months later? And so it would be nice if the cupping or anything, when people massage, I'm like, dig into it, it feels good to have it, like, touched and nourished, so I will try the cupping. Thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, because you don't, I don't care cosmetically what this looks like at all. It is like a battle scar, it's like I'm proud of it, but the scar tissue that develops if you don't do those other things, that's what we get the limited mobility from. So that's what I want to try to avoid. And going into, what you wish you knew or started off knowing, just jumping ahead a little bit on that subject. I wish I would have known what physical therapy was supposed to be like this if you had a really aggressive one. Because the lady that did my manual massage and treatment, it was always very gentle. And I don't, she said, oh, it's more like I'm doing a lymphatic kind of thing. And then when she decided she didn't want to do this anymore because she didn't like the manual and she went to go into the administrative side of PT, and then another PT came on and she was like, I'm going to dig into this thing. And I thought, man, this has been like 3 months or so of this other touchy kind of thing. If I would have had someone that was really pushing it and doing the cupping in the beginning, I think I could have recovered quicker. The scar tissue wouldn't have had so much time to develop. She would have nipped it in the bud. So that
Yeah.
was a big thing that I wish I would have known, that I could have asked somebody. Like, don't be afraid. Go in there. I'm here not to, hang out and get a massage at a spa. I want you to really help me get to where I need to be as soon as possible.
Totally. Yeah, dig in. You're so right. And it feels so, so good. The other thing kind of with the things I wish I knew is, like, in hindsight, maybe I do kind of wish I'd gone the anterior approach. I chose the posterior because I really liked the surgeon.
Me
But
too.
them after him not approving the second night in the hospital, my feelings kind of shifted. And so I'm like, wow, I went a different route just because I thought he had really great bedside manner. And then that all, kind of shifted. So in hindsight, I wish I think I would have gone the anterior, but either way, it's fine with what it is. The other thing was how kind of I don't know. It is so funny because I think this is different from your experience. I felt like people stared at me with my little cane.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember you saying, like, "Oh, are people like so nice?" And I was like, "Oh, she's not in DC." And and it was just like this weird sort of thing, and not a big deal. I didn't mind the cane. It was pink. It was fun. It was like fine. It really helped. But I didn't like being stared at. And I had the same experience with my dog who is disabled, right? Like his back legs just work funny. He was born that way, but people will stop and turn around to look at him. And I find that so offensive. And then to feel the same way as I'm like hobbling along and walking him who's hobbling along. It just that really, I don't know what I could have done differently, not gone out in public, but I think it's just a good reminder to not stare at people because something is different, which we shouldn't
I
have to
do.
say that.
And, I got to the point of, hey, I need the cane. So when I saw that people were opening the door, oh, here, don't stand in line, coming in, I was like, okay, fine. But exactly the same discomfort. When I first started to get out, with the walker even, where we go to a restaurant or, it's challenging enough. And you couldn't sit like at a high top if that was all that was available because you couldn't get up there. And then sometimes they're narrow. And so you can't get the walker through and then everyone's up moving their tables. But the staring thing, I think, and you're a decade at least younger than me, but it's still, I'm not your typical candidate for the walker and a cane. So I think there's this level of curiosity. And I was getting, like I remember my first going back to mass and going down, and people are like, yeah, what, 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 ooh, what? So curious, like what happened. And they just don't want to think that maybe that's going to happen to them. And that would fall into a lot of disabilities, "Ooh, wow, look at that. I wonder what happened to her that she's using that. Was it a car accident?" Typical people wondering, of what's going on and sometimes happy that it's, just grateful that it's not them. I don't know what their motivations are. But yeah, it's uncomfortable because you have to prepare to be. I don't like being the center of attention anywhere. So that was a little unsettling, to be introverted, wanting to be a little cocooned out there with this thing.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point, the curiosity. And what I will say, what I really appreciated with like kind of some of my neighbors around is, I hadn't told people, right, I was going to have this happen. And some people acted as if like nothing was different, which is odd when you have a cane, right? Where others were like, oh, what happened? Which I appreciated that because clearly something's different. But if you
Yeah.
just stare, that's the thing that bothered me. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. Where it was really good is I went to Paris after my 3-month mark, right? I took not an online, an in-person art workshop. And I definitely, it was too much because hauling the bag and then having one over my shoulder at the airport, by the time I got to Paris, I had to break out my cane. And I almost didn't bring it because I hadn't been using it for a month and a half. And Tim was like, "Do you want to take it just in case?" I was like, I guess. And I remember it was really tough. I needed it there just at the beginning, especially after having thrown myself off by holding the bag. But I remember being on the metro there and, standing there with my cane and some really nice younger guy, like in his 20s, was like, "Do you want to sit?" And that was like so sweet. That made me feel really good. And then also I milked it. Whenever I was on the flight coming back to DC, I went up to the ticket taker and I was like, I just had a hip replacement. Is there any way I can get on kind of in the early group? And they were like, "No problem." I was like, "Yay, this actually got me like one thing?"
I know. What about the airports? I was concerned about that, and I'm going through the X-ray machine, or would it set it off? And my doctor's office told me that you don't need to carry a card. They're used to that. I guess back in the day, you'd have to show that you had some kind of implant or something. And some airports, it sets up, some it doesn't. So I just automatically tell them, look, I've got a new hip. When between the two surgeries, when I couldn't lift my leg, I did have a trip to Paris as well. And, I when you're used to like running up the metro steps and lugging stuff, like you said, those are steep and you see people of all ages, ancient doing it too. I had to actually learn how to use my body in a different way. So I would pull myself up by holding on and just lifting that leg. And so people were fine. I could be in the busy, but I had no choice. And so I had to do that. And nobody was like, move it, like I think might have been done here. Where I live, you know, take the elevator. What are you trying to do the steps? Moving along. We're busy. But you learn how to adapt to things as we did prior to the surgery.
Yeah, that's such a good thing. I will say that's really great about Paris. I have never felt like I was just in New York last weekend. Okay, night and day. In New York, if you stop on the sidewalk for any reason, people are very angry, right? And Paris, I mean, we just go around each other, or like you go around somebody on the stairs. There's not the level of impatience. Now, I'm not going to say like, okay, this is across the board every time, but I have never felt someone was exasperated behind me as I do in New York, or in many of the bigger cities. And I get it, people are used to like this where they're not there. Um,
Right.
but
Right.
the stairs, how are you now? Because I still struggle getting up the stairs. Yeah, that's really, I don't have the strength yet.
I was there, in January, and I noticed a remarkable improvement with that because I'm trying to just, walk straight without, because I was overcompensating too by moving my hip. And so I was actually training my muscle to my leg would go over my right leg. Hard to describe, but you want to walk straight and not have your muscles just go this way. And I was doing okay. I have to catch myself to keep that on track 'cause it's easier to just let it go that way without holding on. And I was really happy. A lot of the PT really helped because this would be very different for you, but I never really focused like building a very strong core until I had my back issue where I had to replicate a brace by my own muscles. And then by continuing that practice with the PT for the hip really helped a lot with navigating Paris, because I'm at the top where you're up the hills constantly walking and are panting out of breath. And this time I was like, wow, is this a bonus? Listening to your body and knowing what your body's capabilities are. This really opened my eyes to what's going on with that and how I can help myself do that.
Totally.
So
Totally.
for
No,
me, blessings in this whole thing, there are plenty, but there's just you can't be in denial about these other things. It's a very humbling experience, right?
it is. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, my last question for you, Denise Marie, is of course the name of this podcast, Tranquility du Jour. And I'll
Yeah.
just kind of shift it a little bit because I usually ask guests, how do they find tranquility in the everyday? But I'm going to ask you, how are you finding tranquility after the surgery, right? Especially with the complications and trying to get back on track. I won't say like back to how you were because how you were before was in pain, right? So it's like, what are you finding that's been helpful during this process?
I love this bonus question because the biggest thing for me is, it's going to sound sappy or, so cliche, but gratitude because just to have the peace of focusing on the things that I do have as opposed to what I don't have. I had to keep on training myself, throughout this whole process. And I readjusted my whole approach of gratitude because I would, be complaining like, oh, this toilet seat riser, this is horrible. And my Amazon deliveries are usually books and candles and fun things. And now they're like all these weird things like raised toilet seats. And instead of focusing on all of that, I was focusing on the little progresses I would make. And it just brought me so much peace. And so now I can see how that's carried over to a lot of my life. So if I'm annoyed by somebody, I think of like all the others that aren't annoying, and it's just been it brings you a lot of tranquility. And I think a lot of that, came about a reframe of gratitude through the hip surgery. if that makes any sense. It's clear to me that the focus was on what I do have, the blessings I do have. And I know gratitude lists get you to think about that, but to quickly um, reframe things when you catch yourself doing that. It's like a constant state of gratitude.
Yeah, I like that. It's like, okay, what's going well with my hip today? It's like, because
Yeah.
I think I was always along, I was like, I'm going to be perfect in 3 months. Everything's going to be normal. It's going to be great. And right. So, what I was noticing, because as you're healing, you're observing the things that aren't quite right. So, I love that mindset of like, what's good? I can bend
Yeah.
over now and pick things
Yeah.
up without a reacher.
No. And now I use that grabber to like gives me I have a bad throwing arm and little Oscar loves playing catch. And it's like I hit him in the head, it goes like 3 feet. They're reacher now. I grab the ball. So I'm learning to repurpose my stuff. As far as that toilet seat thing goes, I don't know what I'm gonna do with that. But it doesn't even fold up. It's in the garage. I have like a whole medical supply corner in there.
I
So
think you can donate all sorts of things. I saw a little note up at a PT office that was like, we take donations. So,
oh,
you might want to look
Google
into
that.
that.
That's
Yeah,
a healthy Google. I'm gonna do that because you're
totally.
holding on to it saying, well, just in case the other
Right.
one goes, I'll get more Amazon
Yeah.
delivery. That
Right.
happens.
Right. There'll be
Thank you
more.
thanks for telling me that. I never even thought about that. It clear up some space in the
Totally.
garage too. So thank you.
Totally. You're welcome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And listeners, I hope this is helpful because, all the questions I've gotten as you think about listening to your own body and making big decisions along these lines, I hope that you're able to do so with a sense of ease and tranquility in the process.
Yes, it was a pleasure. Thank you, Kimberly, for letting me talk about this with you.
Thank you.